The storm came without warning, tearing through the Pacific night like the hand of something ancient and furious. Lucas pressed himself against the cabin wall as the cargo ship tilted violently to one side, seawater flooding through the corridors in violent surges that smelled of salt and diesel fuel. His parents had told him to stay below deck no matter what happened. His mother's last words before she ran topside with his father were simple and absolute. "Stay here, Lucas. Lock the door. We'll come back for you." But they never came back. The ship groaned like a dying animal, metal twisting against itself with sounds that seemed impossible for anything man-made to produce. Lucas held onto the cabin door frame as the floor became a wall, then a ceiling, then a floor again. When the explosion came, it was not loud like in movies. It was a deep, hollow sound that traveled through the entire structure of the ship, followed by the terrible silence of something irreversibly broken. The cabin door burst open under the pressure of incoming water. Lucas had maybe 30 seconds before the room filled completely. He grabbed the emergency life vest his father had shown him during the safety briefing 3 days earlier, when this voyage had still felt like an adventure, like the beginning of something good instead of the end of everything. He pulled himself through the flooded corridor toward the stairwell, his lungs burning as he held his breath against the churning seawater. His hands found the metal railing, and he climbed, pulled by pure survival instinct, until he broke through the surface into the screaming wind of the storm. The deck was chaos. Cargo containers had broken loose and were sliding across the tilted surface like toys. Crew members shouted in Spanish and English, trying to deploy life rafts that the wind immediately tore away into the darkness. Lucas searched desperately for his parents among the shapes moving through the rain and spray. "Mom. Dad." His voice was nothing against the storm. The ship lurched again, harder this time, and Lucas fell. He slid across the wet deck toward the railing, his hands clawing uselessly at smooth metal. He hit the side barrier and flipped over into the ocean. The cold was instant and absolute. It drove the air from his lungs and replaced it with liquid darkness. He kicked toward what he hoped was the surface, his child's arms weak against the current, until his head broke into the storm air, and he gasped and choked and lived for a few more seconds. Lightning illuminated the scene in frozen bursts. The cargo ship was already half submerged, tilted at an angle that defied physics, its lights flickering as electrical systems failed. People were in the water, shapes darker than the waves, some swimming, some floating motionless. Lucas tried to swim back toward the ship, toward any chance of finding his parents, but the current was stronger than any human effort. It pulled him away into the heaving darkness of the open Pacific. He found a piece of broken cargo crate and wrapped his arms around it, holding on with a grip that would leave bruises across his chest for weeks afterward. The storm drove him farther from the sinking ship until he could no longer see its lights, until there was nothing but black water and black sky and the endless punishment of wind and rain. Hours passed in a delirium of cold and exhaustion. Lucas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes dreaming he was back in his bed in the small apartment in Ensenada where they had lived before his parents accepted the humanitarian mission that had brought them onto this doomed voyage. Sometimes he dreamed his mother was singing to him in her quiet voice, the lullabies she had learned from her own mother, who had died before Lucas was born. He did not know when the storm finally broke. He only knew that at some point the violence of the waves diminished to a heavy, rolling motion, and the rain became drizzle, and the sky began to lighten from black to gray. Lucas opened his eyes and saw something impossible. Ahead of him, maybe 200 meters away, there was land. But it was land that should not exist. It rose from the ocean like a piece of another world, a small island covered in dense vegetation that seemed far too green, too alive, for something surrounded by empty sea. The rocks at its base were dark and volcanic, worn smooth by endless waves, but the jungle that grew above them was thick and untamed. Mist clung to the island in layers that moved independently of the wind, creating the impression that the whole formation was somehow breathing, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched no natural process Lucas had ever witnessed. But what truly made his exhausted mind reject what he was seeing was the way the island sat in the water. It did not feel anchored. It felt suspended, as if the ocean were holding it up rather than the land rising from beneath. Lucas kicked weakly toward it, his legs barely responding after hours in the cold water. The current, which had fought him all night, now seemed to cooperate, pushing him gently toward the rocky shore. His feet touched bottom sooner than expected. He stumbled through the shallows and collapsed on black sand that felt warm despite the gray morning light. For several minutes he simply lay there, coughing seawater and breathing air that tasted of salt and something else, something organic and almost sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. When he finally had the strength to sit up, he looked back at the ocean and realized he could not see the horizon. The mist that surrounded the island created a curtain that made distance impossible to judge. He could have been 2 miles from shore or 200. There was no way to know. He was alone on an island that appeared on no map he had ever seen, with no food, no fresh water, and no idea if rescue would ever come. His parents were gone. The ship was gone. Everything he had known was at the bottom of the Pacific. Lucas was 9 years old, and his childhood had ended somewhere in the dark water behind him. He stood on shaking legs and turned to face the jungle. The island was waiting. The beach was narrow, maybe 30 feet of black sand before the vegetation began in earnest. Lucas walked along the shoreline, his waterlogged shoes leaving deep prints that filled immediately with seeping water. He needed to find shelter before nightfall, and more urgently, he needed fresh water. His father had taught him basic survival knowledge during their camping trips in the Baja Mountains. 3 rules, always in the same order: shelter, water, food. A human could survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, but only 3 hours without proper shelter in harsh conditions. As he walked, Lucas noticed something strange about the jungle that edged the beach. The plants were wrong, not in an obvious way, but in subtle details that his young mind struggled to articulate. There were palm trees, but their fronds grew in spiral patterns he had never seen. There were flowering vines, but their blossoms opened and closed rhythmically, like breathing. The bamboo that grew in thick clusters seemed to hum with a frequency just below the range of hearing, something he felt more than heard. After walking for maybe 20 minutes, he found what he was looking for: a break in the vegetation where a small stream flowed from the jungle interior down to the ocean. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones that were covered in a thin layer of green moss. Lucas knelt and cupped his hands, bringing the water to his lips cautiously. His father had warned him about drinking untreated water, about parasites and bacteria that could kill you slowly from the inside. But he had no choice. His body was dehydrated after hours in salt water, and his tongue felt thick and swollen in his mouth. The water tasted clean, almost impossibly pure, with a mineral quality that reminded him of mountain springs. He drank until his stomach cramped, then sat back on the rocks and let the reality of his situation settle over him like a weight. He was alive. That was something. But he was also utterly alone. He followed the stream inland, using it as a guide into the jungle. The vegetation grew thicker as he moved away from the beach, creating a canopy overhead that filtered the gray morning light into a soft green glow. The air was humid and heavy, filled with sounds he could not identify. Insect clicks, bird calls that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, and underneath it all, that same low-frequency hum he had noticed in the bamboo. After 10 minutes of walking, Lucas found the first sign that he was not the first human to reach this place. It was a carving on a tree trunk, worn smooth by time and weather, but still visible. It showed a simple figure, a child's drawing of a person with arms outstretched, and beneath it, scratched words in Spanish that were barely legible. La Isla Protege. The island protects. Lucas touched the carving with trembling fingers. Someone else had been here. Someone who had survived long enough to leave a message. The realization brought both hope and fear. Hope that survival was possible. Fear that the person who had carved this message was no longer here to explain what it meant. He continued following the stream upward through increasingly dense jungle until he reached a small clearing where the water pooled into a natural basin before continuing its journey to the sea. And there, on the far side of the clearing, he saw the structure. It was not large, maybe 15 feet long and 10 feet wide, built from bamboo and palm fronds, in a design that suggested both skill and desperation. The roof was intact, angled to shed rain, and the walls, though weathered, still stood firm. Vines had begun to grow over parts of it, incorporating the human-made shelter back into the jungle, but the entrance was clear. Lucas approached slowly, every survival instinct screaming caution. But the structure was clearly abandoned. No smoke from a fire, no sounds of habitation, just silence and the steady drip of water from leaves overhead. He ducked through the low entrance. The interior was dim but dry. The floor had been covered with flat stones to keep out moisture, and there were remnants of a more permanent habitation. A raised sleeping platform made from bamboo, a fire pit lined with rocks, bamboo containers that had once held water or food, now empty and overturned. And on the far wall, more carvings. Not just simple drawings this time, but detailed text, carved painstakingly into the bamboo supports of the shelter. Lucas moved closer, his eyes adjusting to the low light, and began to read. The words were in multiple languages: Spanish, English, what looked like Portuguese, and others he could not identify. But the message was the same, repeated in each language like a litany of desperate hope. If you find this place, you are not alone. The island chose you. Stay near the water. The fruit is safe. Do not try to leave until the island is ready. Lucas read the words 3 times, trying to understand. The island chose you. What did that mean? Islands did not choose people. They were just land surrounded by water, neutral and indifferent to human suffering. But even as his rational mind rejected the message, some deeper part of him recognized a truth in the words. He had survived a shipwreck that should have killed him. He had drifted for hours in storm conditions that would have drowned an adult. And he had found this place, this impossible green island surrounded by mist, exactly when he had nothing left. Coincidence? Or something else? He explored the rest of the shelter more carefully. Beneath the sleeping platform, he found a collection of objects left by previous inhabitants. A rusted knife with a bamboo handle, several empty glass bottles that had once held supplies, a water-damaged journal wrapped in what had once been waterproof cloth. Lucas unwrapped the journal with careful hands. The pages were stiff and warped, the ink faded and smeared in places, but parts were still legible. He carried it to the entrance where the light was better and began to read. The first entry was dated almost 30 years earlier. My name is Miguel. I am 12 years old. My boat capsized in a storm and I washed up here 4 days ago. I thought I would die. But the island is keeping me alive. I don't understand how, but I'm not hungry even though I've barely eaten. The water from the stream tastes like it has minerals that make me stronger. Last night I heard sounds like voices, but when I went to look, there was nothing there. Just the jungle breathing in the dark. Lucas flipped through the pages, finding entries from different people spanning decades. Each one told a similar story. Shipwreck or disaster. Lone survivor. Discovery of the island. And always the same observation. The island was alive in some way that defied explanation. One entry, written in English by someone named Sarah, caught his attention. Day 23. I tried to build a raft to leave. Used bamboo and vines, spent 3 days on it. When I pushed it into the water, it fell apart instantly, like the vines had rotted overnight even though I just cut them. I understand now. The island isn't ready to let me go. I don't know if I should be terrified or grateful. Maybe both. There's fruit growing near my shelter that wasn't there yesterday. Purple things that look like figs but taste like honey and meat somehow. I ate 3 and felt full for 2 days. This place is taking care of me. Why? Lucas closed the journal and sat in the entrance of the shelter, looking out at the clearing. The light had changed, shifting from gray morning to the warmer tones of late afternoon. He had lost hours reading the entries, absorbed in the experiences of other lost children who had found this place before him. The island protects. He did not want to believe it. It sounded like superstition, like the kind of magical thinking that his father had always gently discouraged. His parents had been scientists, rational people who explained the world through observation and evidence. But they were also dead. And he was alive on an island that should not exist, reading the journals of other survivors who had experienced things that science could not easily explain. As the sun began to set, painting the mist around the island in shades of orange and deep purple, Lucas made a decision. He would stay in the shelter. He would drink from a stream. He would look for the fruit that others had mentioned. And he would wait to see if the island really was protecting him, or if he was simply delaying the inevitable end. That night, lying on the bamboo sleeping platform with his wet clothes spread out to dry and his body finally beginning to warm, Lucas heard the sounds that Miguel and the others had described. Voices in the jungle. Not quite human, not quite anything else. They rose and fell like conversation in a language he almost understood, coming from no specific direction, seeming to emanate from the island itself. He was terrified, but he was also, for the first time since the shipwreck, not entirely alone. The island was speaking, and somehow Lucas knew it was speaking to him. Lucas woke before dawn to the sound of rain on the bamboo roof. It was a steady, gentle rain, nothing like the violent storm that had destroyed the ship. He lay still for a moment, listening to the rhythm, feeling the dampness in the air, and slowly becoming aware that he had slept through the entire night without nightmares. That surprised him. He had expected to dream of drowning, of watching his parents disappear into black water, of the moment the ship tilted and everything familiar became chaos. But instead, his sleep had been deep and empty, as if something had reached into his mind and smoothed away the sharp edges of trauma. He sat up and examined the shelter in the growing light. During the night, while he slept, something had changed. Near the fire pit, there was now a small pile of fruit that had definitely not been there when he fell asleep. Purple figs, just like Sarah had described in her journal entry. And next to them, 3 or 4 round fruits he did not recognize, with mottled green skin and a smell like vanilla and coconut mixed together. Lucas approached them slowly, as if they might disappear if he moved too quickly. He picked up one of the purple figs and examined it closely. It was firm, but yielding slightly under pressure, perfectly ripe. There were no insect holes, no signs of rot. It looked like something you would find in an expensive market, not lying on the floor of an abandoned shelter in the middle of nowhere. He bit into it carefully. The taste was extraordinary, sweet but complex, with layers of flavor that kept changing as he chewed. First honey, then something like roasted nuts, then a finish that reminded him of the mole sauce his grandmother used to make, rich and slightly spicy. His stomach, which had been cramping with hunger since he woke up, suddenly felt satisfied. Not just fed, but nourished in a way that seemed impossible from a single piece of fruit. He ate 2 more of the figs and one of the unknown round fruits, which tasted even better, like someone had concentrated the essence of every good breakfast he had ever eaten into a single bite. Within minutes, he felt stronger than he had in days. His muscles, which had been weak and trembling from cold water exposure and exhaustion, now felt stable and responsive. The island was feeding him. Lucas sat back against the bamboo wall and tried to process what was happening. There were rational explanations for some of it. Maybe the fruit had fallen through gaps in the roof during the night. Maybe the nutritional density of tropical fruit was just much higher than he realized. Maybe his body was so depleted that any food would have this effect. But the rational explanations felt thin, unconvincing. Deep down, he knew something else was happening. The island was not just a place. It was aware, and it was taking care of him. After eating, Lucas decided to explore more of the island. He needed to understand the size of his prison or sanctuary, depending on how you looked at it. He needed to know if there were other structures, other signs of previous inhabitants, maybe even supplies that could help him survive long-term. He left the shelter and followed the stream upward, moving deeper into the interior. The jungle grew denser as he climbed, the canopy overhead becoming so thick that the morning light barely penetrated. But the trail alongside the stream was clear, as if something regularly traveled this path and kept the vegetation from encroaching. After 20 minutes of walking, The stream led him to its source, a natural spring bubbling up from a crack in volcanic rock. The water emerged crystal clear and almost warm, creating a small pool before overflowing to begin its journey down to the sea. The rocks around the spring were carved with more symbols, dozens of them, layered over each other like a palimpsest of human presence spanning generations. Lucas knelt by the pool and studied the carvings. They were all different languages and different styles, but they shared common themes. Hands reaching upward, circles within circles, and repeatedly, the figure of a child standing alone. Beneath the water, at the bottom of the shallow pool, he could see something metallic. He reached in and pulled out a small tin box, sealed with wax that had somehow survived immersion. His fingers trembled as he pried it open. Inside were more journal pages, protected from water damage, written in Spanish with careful handwriting. My name is Elena. I am 11 years old. I have been on the island for 6 months. At first, I tried to leave every day. I built rafts. I swam until exhaustion. I screamed for rescue until my voice was gone. But the island always brought me back. The currents would turn my raft in circles. The mist would disorient me until I was back on the beach. I thought I was going insane. But then I stopped fighting. I accepted that I was here for a reason I did not understand. And that is when everything changed. The island began to show me things. Not visions exactly, but feelings. Memories that were not mine. I felt the presence of every other child who had ever been here. All of us lost. All of us alone. All of us chosen by something we cannot explain. Last night I understood. This island is a refuge, but not a permanent one. It is a crossing place. It keeps us safe until we are ready for what comes next. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm no longer afraid. If you are reading this, young brother or sister, know that you are exactly where you need to be. Stop fighting. Let the island teach you. Your time here has a purpose. Lucas read the words 3 times, his heart beating faster with each pass. 6 months. Elena had been here for 6 months. That meant survival was not just possible, it was sustainable. But it also meant that whatever process the island represented, it was not quick. He folded the pages carefully and placed them back in the tin, returning it to its position at the bottom of the spring. Some future survivor might need those words as much as he had. As he stood to leave, he noticed something he had missed before. On the far side of the spring, partially hidden by hanging vines, there was a narrow trail leading further up the slope. It looked less traveled than the stream path, more overgrown, but definitely intentional. Lucas hesitated. He could return to the shelter where he knew he had food, water, and protection. Or he could follow this new path and see where it led. The island was teaching him already. It was teaching him that safety and discovery were not the same thing. He pushed through the vines and began to climb. The trail was steep and treacherous, winding between massive tree roots and over moss-covered stones that were slippery with constant moisture. Lucas climbed for what felt like an hour, his legs burning with effort, until the jungle suddenly opened onto a rocky plateau near the island's highest point. And there, overlooking the mist-shrouded ocean, stood another structure. This one was different from the survival shelter he had found earlier. It was older, much older, built from stone instead of bamboo. It looked almost like a small temple, with carved pillars supporting a roof that had partially collapsed, but still offered shelter beneath its remaining sections. Lucas approached slowly, his sense of wonder overwhelming his caution. The stones were covered in carvings far more sophisticated than the simple messages he had found elsewhere. These were detailed scenes, almost like comic book panels, telling a story in images. The first panel showed a storm, waves higher than ships. The second showed children in the water, alone and terrified. The third showed them reaching an island. The same spiral pattern repeated in each depiction, as if the artist wanted to emphasize that it was always the same island, always waiting. The fourth panel showed the children growing, not in age, but in some kind of inner light. The carvings depicted them with radiance emanating from their bodies, as if they were transforming into something more than human. The fifth and final panel showed the children leaving the island, not by boat, but by simply walking into the mist, which opened for them like a door. Lucas stood before the stone story, trying to understand its meaning. Was this literal? Metaphorical? A religious text from some forgotten culture? Or was it a factual record of what happened to children who stayed on the island long enough? He entered the stone structure carefully. The interior was dry despite the missing sections of roof, protected by the angle of the remaining stones. In the center was a circular depression in the floor, like an altar or offering bowl, and surrounding it were more carvings. Names, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, layered over each other, carved in every language Lucas could imagine, and many he could not. These were all the children who had been here before him. Every lost soul who had washed up on this impossible island and survived long enough to leave their mark. Lucas pulled the rusted knife from his pocket, the one he had found in the first shelter. With slow, careful strokes, he added his own name to the stone floor, choosing an empty space near the center. Lucas, age 9, lost everything, found this. As soon as he finished carving the last letter, something changed. The air inside the stone structure seemed to thicken, to become almost liquid. Lucas felt a pressure against his skin, gentle but insistent, like invisible hands pushing him toward the center of the room. He did not resist. He walked to the circular depression and sat down cross-legged, the stone cool against his body despite the tropical heat. And then the island spoke to him, not in words, but in feelings and images that flooded his mind with an intensity that made him gasp. He felt the island's age, ancient beyond human counting, a living thing that had existed long before ships crossed these waters. He felt its purpose, to catch the lost ones, the children who fell through the cracks of the world, who had no one to hold them when they drowned. He felt its loneliness, waiting in the mist for decades between arrivals, keeping itself ready for the next broken soul who needed sanctuary. And he felt its love, not human love, but something older and stranger. The love of a parent who would never abandon, never betray, never fail to protect. The island loved him not because of who he was, but because of what he had lost. It loved his emptiness, his grief, his absolute aloneness, and it promised to fill those voids with something new. But there was more. The island showed him what would happen if he accepted its gift. He would change, not immediately, but gradually over weeks and months. His fear would transform into strength. His loneliness would become connection to something vast. His grief would evolve into purpose. And when the transformation was complete, he would leave the island not as a victim, but as something else. A guardian, a guide, someone who could help other lost children find their way to safety. The vision faded slowly, like waking from a deep dream. Lucas found himself crying, tears running down his face without shame or embarrassment. He was crying for his parents, yes, but also for the sheer relief of being seen, being known, being chosen by something that would never leave him alone. He understood now what Elena had written. The island was not a prison. It was a chrysalis. Lucas stood on shaking legs and walked to the edge of the stone platform, looking out over the endless mist that surrounded the island. Somewhere beyond that gray curtain, the world continued without him. Ships passed. Planes flew overhead. Search and rescue teams might even be looking for survivors of the shipwreck, though he doubted they would find this place. He could try to signal them. He could build fires, spell out SOS on the beach, do everything his father had taught him about emergency survival. But he would not. Because for the first time since the storm, he did not want to be rescued. He wanted to stay. He wanted to let the island teach him. He wanted to become whatever it was shaping him into. Lucas turned away from the view and descended the steep trail back to the spring, then down to the shelter that was becoming his home. The fruit was still there, fresh and perfect. The stream still flowed with clean water. The bamboo walls still kept out the rain. He lay down on the sleeping platform as the sun set over the invisible horizon, painting the mist in colors that had no names. And he spoke out loud for the first time since the shipwreck. "Thank you." The jungle seemed to exhale in response. The low hum that was always present grew slightly louder, more distinct, almost melodic. It sounded like acceptance, like welcome. Lucas closed his eyes and let sleep take him again, knowing that when he woke, the island would still be there, breathing around him, protecting him, preparing him for a destiny he could not yet imagine, but was learning to trust. His old life was gone. The shipwreck had taken everything that defined him. But the island was offering something in return. A new identity, a new purpose, a new family that was not human but was no less real. He was no longer just Lucas, the orphaned boy who lost his parents in a storm. He was becoming something else, something the island needed, something the world needed, even if it did not know it yet. The transformation had already begun. The days that followed developed a rhythm that Lucas gradually learned to recognize as the island's way of teaching. Each morning, he would wake to find exactly what he needed waiting near the shelter. Fruit when he was hungry, fresh bamboo shoots when he needed materials for repairs. Even medicinal plants appeared when he developed a fever after 3 days of continuous rain, their leaves reducing his temperature within hours when he chewed them as instinct seemed to direct. He was never told what to do. The island did not speak in commands or instructions. Instead, it created gentle pressures, subtle guidances. He would feel drawn to explore a certain direction, and there he would find something essential. A grove of trees with bark that could be woven into rope. A patch of clay perfect for creating waterproof containers. A fallen log hollowed by insects that amplified sound when he tapped it, creating a drum that echoed across the entire island. By the end of the second week, Lucas had expanded the original shelter, adding a covered area where he could work on projects during rain. He built a more sophisticated water collection system, bamboo channels that directed stream water into containers he had shaped from clay and hardened in fire. He created a smoking rack where he preserved fish he caught in the tidal pools near the beach, using techniques he did not remember learning, but somehow knew how to execute perfectly. The island was teaching him through his hands, through his body, through instincts that awakened like dormant seeds finally exposed to water and sunlight. But the physical lessons were only part of the transformation. The deeper changes were happening inside his mind, in places he could not see but could definitely feel. His grief over his parents had not disappeared, but it had changed texture. The sharp, immediate pain of loss had softened into something more like deep sadness mixed with gratitude for the years he had been given with them. When he thought of his mother now, he remembered her laugh instead of her scream as the ship tilted. When he thought of his father, he saw him teaching Lucas to tie knots and read maps instead of disappearing into the storm darkness. The island was healing him by allowing him to remember differently. One morning during the third week, Lucas woke before dawn and felt an overwhelming urge to walk to the beach. He followed the impulse without question, having learned that the island's suggestions always had purpose. When he reached the shore, the sun was just beginning to rise, turning the mist from gray to gold. And there, washed up on the black sand, was a large wooden crate sealed with metal bands. Lucas ran to it, his heart pounding. The crate was stamped with shipping information that was partially illegible from water damage, but he could make out enough to know it had come from a cargo ship, his parent ship. It must have been floating in the current for weeks before the island's mysterious tides brought it here. He used the rusted knife to pry open the metal bands. Inside, packed in waterproof plastic, were medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, antibiotics, pain medication. All the materials his parents had been transporting to the remote village they had been trying to reach before the storm. But beneath the medical supplies, wrapped in a separate waterproof bag, was something that made Lucas's breath catch in his throat. His mother's journal. The leather-bound book where she recorded her thoughts, her observations, her hopes for the work she and his father were doing. And tucked between its pages, a photograph of the three of them taken 2 weeks before the voyage, smiling in front of their apartment in Ensenada, unaware that their time together was about to end. Lucas sat on the sand with the journal and the photograph, and for the first time since the shipwreck, he allowed himself to fully cry. Not the silent tears he had shed in the stone temple, but loud, wrenching sobs that came from the deepest part of his chest. He cried until his body was empty, until there were no more tears, until he was simply breathing and existing and being alive despite everything. When the crying finally stopped, the sun was fully above the horizon, burning off the mist in slow tendrils of vapor. Lucas opened his mother's journal to a random page and read her handwriting. So familiar, it made his chest ache. Lucas is growing so fast. Sometimes I look at him and wonder where the toddler went, the one who used to grip my finger with his whole hand. He's becoming independent, thoughtful, curious about everything. Last night, he asked me what happens to people when they die. I told him I didn't know for certain, but I believe that the love we create doesn't disappear. It transforms into something else, something that stays in the world and helps other people even when we're gone. He seemed satisfied with that answer. I hope I'm right. I hope that if anything ever happens to us, he'll feel our love continuing somehow, protecting him even when we can't be there physically. Lucas closed the journal carefully and held it against his chest. His mother had been right. Her love was still here, not just in memory, but in something more tangible. The island had brought him this crate at exactly the moment he needed it, exactly when his healing required him to confront his grief directly instead of letting it transform too quickly into something else. He stood and carried the crate back to his shelter, unpacking the medical supplies carefully and storing them in the driest corner of the structure. The journal and photograph he placed in the tin box he had found at the spring, sealing them carefully to protect them from moisture. These were his treasures now, not just objects, but connections to who he had been before the island began shaping him into who he would become. That afternoon, while organizing the medical supplies, Lucas heard something that made him freeze. A sound he had not heard in weeks. A human voice. Not the almost voices of the island's nighttime whispers, but an actual human voice, young and terrified, calling for help from somewhere near the beach. Lucas grabbed the knife and ran toward the sound, his heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. Another survivor? After all this time? He burst through the jungle onto the beach and saw a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, collapsed at the waterline. She was soaking wet, shivering violently, her lips blue with cold. As Lucas ran toward her, she looked up with eyes full of desperate relief. "Help me," she whispered in Spanish. "Please. I don't want to die." Lucas knelt beside her and put his hand on her shoulder, feeling how cold she was despite the tropical heat. "You're not going to die," he said firmly. "The island will protect you. I promise." The girl stared at him with confusion and fading consciousness. "What island? There's nothing here. Just rocks and mist." Lucas understood then. She could not see it yet. Just like he probably had not seen the island fully during those first hours after his own arrival. The island revealed itself gradually, only to those it chose to save. "Trust me," he said, lifting her carefully. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere warm. You're going to be okay." As he carried her toward the shelter, the girl's eyes closed and she went limp in his arms. But her breathing was steady, her pulse strong. She was exhausted, traumatized, but alive. Lucas laid her on the sleeping platform and covered her with the blankets he had woven from palm fibers. He built up the fire and prepared warm water with herbs that would help restore her core temperature. And while he worked, he realized something profound. This was why the island had been preparing him. Not just for his own survival, but for this moment. For the responsibility of guiding another lost child through the same journey he had experienced. He was no longer just a survivor. He was becoming a guardian, exactly as the stone carvings had shown. The island had taught him everything he needed to know to help this girl survive her first night, her first week, her first transformation. When she woke hours later, confused and afraid, Lucas was ready. He had fruit waiting, clean water, and most importantly, he had words of comfort from someone who had survived what she was going through. "My name is Lucas," he said gently. "What's yours?" The girl looked at him with wide, dark eyes. "Sophia," she whispered. "My boat, there was a fire." "Everyone." "I know," Lucas said quietly. "The same thing happened to me. 3 weeks ago. I lost my parents. I lost everything." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. So we're going to die here? Alone? Lucas shook his head. No. We're going to live here. And we're not alone. The island is with us. And now we have each other. He spent the rest of the evening telling her everything he had learned. About the fruit that appeared when you needed it. About the water that healed. About the voices in the jungle that were not threats, but communication. About the transformation that was already beginning inside her, even though she could not feel it yet. Sophia listened with the expression of someone who wanted to believe, but could not quite let go of her fear. Lucas understood completely. He had felt exactly the same way. You don't have to believe me right now, he said as the sun set and the mist turned purple and gold. Just rest. Eat when I give you food. Drink the water. Let the island take care of you. In a few days, you'll start to understand. That night, lying on the floor beside the platform where Sophia slept, Lucas heard the island's whispers again. But this time, they sounded different. Less like distant conversation and more like approval. Like pride. He had passed some kind of test he had not known he was taking. He had received another lost child with compassion instead of resentment, with generosity instead of hoarding the island's resources for himself. The transformation was continuing. He was becoming what the island needed him to be. A protector. A teacher. A bridge between terror and hope. And somewhere in the mist beyond the island, the ocean continued its work, carrying more lost children toward this impossible place of refuge and rebirth. Lucas did not know how many would come, but he knew with absolute certainty that he would be ready for each one. The island had chosen him, and he was choosing every day to accept that destiny. Sophia's first week on the island followed a pattern Lucas now recognized. The initial shock and disbelief, the desperate attempts to find rational explanations, the gradual acceptance that something beyond normal understanding was happening, and finally, the moment when resistance transformed into cooperation. For Sophia, that moment came on the 6th day. Lucas had taken her to the spring, showing her the carvings and the tin box with Elena's letter. She read the words silently, her lips moving, and when she finished, she looked at Lucas with an expression of complete transformation. "This is real," she said quietly. "All of it. The island is alive." "Yes," Lucas confirmed. "And it chose us?" "Yes." "Why?" Lucas had asked himself the same question many times. "I think because we needed it more than anyone else in the world at that exact moment. Because we were completely alone. Because we had lost everything. And the island exists specifically for children like us." Sophia was quiet for a long time, staring into the spring water. Then she asked the question Lucas had been waiting for. "What happens to us here? Do we just survive until someone rescues us? Or is there something else?" Lucas pulled out his mother's journal from the tin box and showed Sophia the passage about love transforming instead of disappearing. "I think we become the next version of ourselves, the people we're supposed to be. And when that transformation is complete, the island will let us leave. But we won't leave as victims. We'll leave as something stronger." "How do you know?" "Because I can feel it happening inside me. Every day, I'm less afraid. Every day, I understand more. And every day, I feel more connected to something bigger than myself." Sophia nodded slowly. "I feel it too. Just a little bit. Like something is waking up inside me." They returned to the shelter together. And over the following weeks, Lucas taught Sophia everything he had learned. How to read the island's subtle signals. How to find food and medicine. How to build and repair. How to listen to the whispers without fear. How to let the transformation happen instead of fighting it. But Sophia was not just a student. She brought her own gifts to the partnership. She was better at fishing than Lucas, more patient and observant. She taught him songs her mother had sung to her, and their voices together seemed to make the jungle hum with harmony. She drew elaborate pictures in the sand of the beach, creating temporary art that the tide would erase, teaching Lucas that beauty did not need to be permanent to be meaningful. They were becoming a family, not siblings exactly, but something closer. Two souls who had been broken by the same type of loss and were being rebuilt by the same mysterious force. On the night of Sophia's 30th day on the island, they sat together on the beach watching the stars appear through gaps in the mist. The sky here was different from anywhere else Lucas had seen. The stars seemed closer, brighter, arranged in patterns that did not match any constellation he had learned. "Lucas," Sophia said quietly, "what if more children come? What if we're supposed to build something permanent here, like a real shelter that could hold 10 or 20 people?" Lucas had been thinking the same thing. "I think that's exactly what we're supposed to do. I think that's part of our transformation, learning to create safety for others the way the island created safety for us." They began planning that night. A larger structure near the spring, built with stone and bamboo, designed to house multiple children and provide communal space for cooking, learning, and healing. It would take months to build, maybe longer. But they had time. The island had taught them both that rushing was not necessary. Growth happened at its own pace. Over the following weeks, they worked on the new structure during the cooler morning hours, gathering materials and carefully shaping them. The island seemed to approve, providing exactly the resources they needed exactly when they needed them. Straight bamboo poles appeared near the construction site, vines with unusual strength for binding, clay deposits that hardened into something nearly as strong as concrete. They were not working alone. Lucas could feel it. The island was working with them, through them, shaping their hands and guiding their choices. It was during the construction of the foundation that the next child arrived. Lucas heard the sound first. A child sobbing, raw and hopeless, coming from the northern beach. He and Sophia ran together, already knowing what they would find. A boy, maybe 7 years old, small for his age, clutching a deflated life vest. His skin was burned red from sun exposure, his lips cracked and bleeding. When he saw Lucas and Sophia approaching, he tried to crawl backward, too weak to stand, too traumatized to trust. "It's okay," Sophia said in the gentlest voice Lucas had ever heard. "We're not going to hurt you. We're like you. We survived too." The boy stared at them with eyes that had seen too much. "The tsunami," he whispered. "Everyone died. The whole village." Lucas knelt slowly, making himself small and non-threatening. "What's your name?" "Miguel." "Miguel, I'm Lucas. This is Sophia. We're going to take care of you now. The island is going to take care of you. You're safe." They carried him to the shelter, gave him water drop by drop to avoid shock, fed him small pieces of fruit, and let him sleep for 16 hours straight. When he woke, they began the process of integration that was becoming routine. Gentle explanations, patient demonstrations. No forcing, no rushing. Just presence and proof through action. Miguel's transformation was faster than Sophia's had been, maybe because he was younger, maybe because he had 2 guides instead of 1. Within 2 weeks, he was helping with the construction project, carrying small stones and weaving palm fronds with surprising skill for someone his age. And the island provided for him just as it had for Lucas and Sophia. Fruits he particularly liked appeared near his sleeping area. The stream water seemed to heal his sun-damaged skin almost overnight. His nightmares, which had been severe during the first week, gradually faded until he slept peacefully through the night. They were becoming a tribe, a family of the lost and found. And each new arrival seemed to accelerate the transformation of those who had come before. Lucas, who had been on the island the longest, was changing most dramatically. He could feel it in his bones, in his blood, in the way his senses were sharpening beyond normal human capacity. He could smell rain coming hours before it arrived. He could hear the footsteps of crabs on the beach from 100 meters away. He could look at a plant and know instinctively whether it was edible, medicinal, or poisonous. But the most significant change was internal. The fear that had defined him during those first days after the shipwreck was completely gone. It had been replaced by something harder to name. Certainty, maybe, or purpose. He knew with absolute conviction that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The stone carvings had been right. The island was transforming them from victims into guardians. And when their time here was complete, they would leave with the ability to guide other lost children toward safety. But that time had not come yet. There was still more to learn, more to build, more to become. On the night they completed the foundation of the new shelter, the three children sat around a fire on the beach. Miguel had fallen asleep against Sophia's shoulder, exhausted from carrying stones all day. Sophia was humming quietly, one of her mother's songs. And Lucas was watching the mist move around the island in patterns that almost seemed intentional, almost seemed like communication. "Do you think we'll ever leave?" Sophia asked quietly, careful not to wake Miguel. Lucas considered the question. "Yes. But not yet. Not until we're ready. Not until we've become what the island needs us to be." "And what's that?" Lucas smiled. "I'm still figuring it out. But I think it has something to do with making sure no child ever feels completely alone, even in the darkest moments. I think we're learning to be light in the darkness." Sophia nodded, understanding. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the whispers of the jungle, knowing that somewhere in the vast ocean, more lost children were drifting toward this impossible place. And when they arrived, broken and terrified and certain that the world had abandoned them, they would find Lucas and Sophia and Miguel waiting. They would find shelter and food and healing. They would find proof that survival was possible, that transformation was real, that loss did not have to be the end of the story. The island was not finished with them yet, but it was preparing them for something important, something necessary, something the world needed even if it did not know how to ask for it. Lucas lay back on the sand and closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire on his skin and the steady breathing of his new family beside him. He was no longer the terrified orphan who had washed up here weeks ago. He was becoming a guardian, a protector, a living bridge between abandonment and hope. And the transformation was just beginning. 6 months had passed since Lucas first arrived on the island. The new shelter now housed 7 children ranging in age from 6 to 13, each with their own story of loss and survival. The structure had grown beyond Lucas's original design, expanding organically as more children arrived, with sleeping quarters, a communal kitchen, a workshop for crafts and repairs, and even a small library where they stored journals and objects from their previous lives. Lucas had turned 10 during his time on the island, though he had no way to mark the exact date. Sophia had organized a celebration anyway, gathering fruit and teaching the younger children to make garlands from flowers that grew near the spring. It had been a strange kind of birthday, marked by absence and presence in equal measure. His parents were gone, but he was surrounded by a family he had helped create. The children had organized themselves naturally into roles that matched their abilities. Sophia was the best at fishing and had taken responsibility for their protein supply. Miguel, despite being the youngest, had an extraordinary talent for building and maintaining structures. A girl named Carmen, who had arrived during the 4th month, had a gift for healing and worked with the medicinal plants. And Lucas, as the first to arrive and the longest resident, had become the de facto leader and primary guide for new arrivals. But leadership on the island was different from leadership in the world beyond. There were no rules, no punishments, no hierarchy of power. Instead, there was something more like collective intuition. The children seemed to know what was needed, and when moving together like a school of fish that turned in unison, without any visible signal. The island itself had become more visible, more present. What had started as subtle whispers and gentle pressures had evolved into something closer to direct communication. Lucas could now sense the island's moods, its satisfaction when the children worked together harmoniously, its gentle correction when someone acted from fear or selfishness instead of community. One morning, Lucas woke to find all 7 children gathered at the beach, staring at something in the water. He joined them and saw what had captured their attention. The mist that usually surrounded the island had pulled back, creating a corridor of clear air and water extending toward the horizon. Through that corridor, Lucas could see something he had not seen in half a year. The mainland, distant but visible. Buildings, roads, the infrastructure of human civilization. Is it time? Sophia asked quietly. Is the island showing us the way out? Lucas felt the answer before he could articulate it. Yes, but not for all of us. Not yet. As he spoke, 3 of the children stepped forward. Carmen, who had been on the island for 2 months. A boy named David, who had arrived 6 weeks earlier. And Miguel, the youngest, who had been there for nearly 5 months. We feel it, Carmen said. Something pulling us toward the opening. Is that wrong? Should we resist? Lucas shook his head. No. When the island opens a path, it means you're ready. You've become what you needed to become. It's time to go back and do what you were prepared to do. The children who were staying, Lucas and Sophia among them, helped the 3 departing children prepare. They packed supplies in waterproof bundles, woven from palm fronds and sealed with tree sap. Food for several days. Water containers. And most importantly, journals where each departing child had recorded everything they had learned on the island. What do we do when we get back? Miguel asked, suddenly looking much younger than his 7 years. Who's going to believe us about this place? Lucas knelt to Miguel's level. You don't have to make them believe. You just have to live what the island taught you. When you see another child who's lost or alone or scared, you help them. You become for them what this place was for you. A refuge. A source of hope. That's the purpose of your transformation. As the sun reached its highest point, the 3 children walked into the water. The corridor through the mist remained open, stable, waiting. They looked back once, waving to the family they were leaving behind, and then they swam forward with strong, confident strokes that would have been impossible for them months earlier. Lucas and the others watched until the 3 figures disappeared into the distance, the mist closing behind them like a curtain after a performance. That night, only 4 children remained on the island. Lucas, Sophia, and 2 others who had arrived more recently. The shelter felt larger, emptier, but not in a sad way. More like a building taking a breath before the next phase of construction. Do you think they'll be okay? One of the newer children asked. Yes, Lucas said with certainty. The island doesn't send anyone away until they're ready. They'll do exactly what they're supposed to do. Over the following weeks, more children arrived to replace those who had left. A girl who had been abandoned by traffickers in the middle of the ocean. Twin boys whose fishing boat had capsized during a storm. A teenager who had jumped from a cruise ship to escape an abusive situation. Each arrival followed the same pattern. Terror, disbelief, gradual acceptance, transformation, and eventually departure through corridors of clear mist that opened when the island determined they were ready. Lucas began to understand the full scope of what was happening. The island was not a permanent home. It was a processing center, a place of metamorphosis. Children arrived broken and left whole. They came as victims and left as guardians. And each one carried forward the lesson of the island, that no child should ever be completely alone, that there is always refuge available for those who need it, and that transformation is possible even after the most devastating loss. But Lucas himself never felt a pull toward the corridors of mist. Month after month, as others came and went, he remained. And gradually he understood why. He was not just another child being transformed. He was becoming something more permanent, a fixture of the island itself, the primary guardian who would remain to guide all the others who came after. On the night of his 1-year anniversary, Lucas stood on the stone platform near the island's peak, looking at the stars through the ever-present mist. Sophia stood beside him, the only other child who had remained for more than 6 months. "Do you ever want to leave?" she asked. Lucas considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss things from before. Pizza, movies, my parents. But I don't want to go back to being who I was. That version of me died in the shipwreck. This version, the one the island created, has a purpose I never would have found in the normal world." "I feel the same way," Sophia said. "I think we're supposed to stay, to be the constant presence while others cycle through." She was right. Lucas could feel it with the same certainty he felt about everything the island taught him. They were the anchors, the permanent guardians. The ones who would remain year after year, transforming continuously, becoming more and more capable of guiding lost children toward hope. But that did not mean their story was over. If anything, it was just beginning, because the island had started showing Lucas something new in his dreams. Visions of other places, other islands, other impossible refuges scattered across the world's oceans. And in each one, a guardian like him. Children who had been broken and rebuilt, who had chosen to stay and serve instead of returning to normal life. They were not alone. They were part of a network, an invisible system of protection that operated beyond human awareness or control. And Lucas was learning to communicate with the other guardians, sharing knowledge through means he did not fully understand but was beginning to master. The island was teaching him to operate at a level beyond individual survival. It was teaching him to think in terms of systems, networks, collective protection for all vulnerable children everywhere. His transformation was far from complete, but he was no longer afraid of where it was leading. He trusted the island completely, the way a child trusts a parent who has never failed them. 2 years after the shipwreck that had killed his parents and destroyed his old life, Lucas stood on the beach watching another lost child wash ashore. A girl, maybe 8 years old, unconscious but breathing. He lifted her carefully and carried her to the shelter, already knowing exactly what to do, exactly what to say when she woke. "You're safe now," he would tell her. "The island chose you, and we're going to help you become who you're meant to be." And the cycle would continue. Loss transformed into purpose. Fear transformed into strength. Abandonment transformed into belonging. The island breathed around him, satisfied, patient, eternal. And Lucas breathed with it, no longer a lost boy, but a guardian of the lost, living his destiny one rescued child at a time, forever changed, forever changing, forever home.